Thanks to CuriosityStream for supporting my channel. Get access to this month's Nebula Journal Club on optical neural networks by signing up in the link in the description. This week, we're going to do something a little bit different. If you haven't already heard, The Social Network is a docudrama on Netflix that explores the way that social networks impact, well, us. It features interviews from former employees and investors in companies like Facebook, Google, Twitter, and more, talking about the ways that social media tends to prey on our weaknesses to increase engagement with the end goal of increasing revenue from advertisers. In between the interviews, the documentary tells the story of a fictional family dealing with their son's increasingly concerning use of social media, as well as an anthropomorphized AI system that is controlling an avatar version of him via personalized recommendations and addictive elements such as notifications about his ex-girlfriend. In short, the film makes the case that the financial incentives that drive social media are also driving society towards dystopia. The film is currently on track to be the most viewed film on Netflix in the month of September and has sparked a lot of conversation about the role of social media in our lives compared to the role that we would like it to have in our lives. In fact, celebrities and public figures, after watching the film, have been increasingly speaking out, ironically on social media, to encourage people to watch the film and reconsider their engagement with social media platforms. However, not everyone's a huge fan of the documentary. For all of the positive press that it's received, researchers and tech journalists alike have called it overly simplistic in the ways that it discusses the impact of social media, as well as its proposed solutions. Additionally, the film has received criticism for interviewing almost exclusively white men who formerly worked at tech companies, while not highlighting the work of people like Ruha Benjamin, Sophia Noble, Joy Bolamwini, and Meredith Broussard, who have been studying and blowing the whistle on the impact of social media platforms for several years now. So given that one of the central themes of this channel is the impact of algorithms on society, and given that I've made videos on social media algorithms in the past, I thought it might be interesting to watch The Social Dilemma and have a little chat from what I appreciated to what I think that they could have done better and whether or not I think you should watch it at all. And if it wasn't already clear, this is mostly going to be my opinion of the documentary with some commentary from other experts in the field thrown in. So I would love to hear what you think both of the documentary itself, but also of this style of video, since it's something that I don't normally do. In fact, if there's another film or documentary or book that you'd like to see me do, you can let me know in the comments. Let's start with what I liked. The first thing that I really appreciated about The Social Dilemma was the fact that it's an educational film about misinformation, surveillance, and on some level ethical design. And I don't think you see a lot of documentaries, especially documentaries that are interesting for the general public, that touch on those topics. So I think it's good that a lot of people are learning more about how these social media platforms are both involved in, but also how their business models on some level are based in engagement, and engagement usually leads to the sharing of content that is inflammatory or just isn't necessarily true, because truth isn't part of the business model. On that note, I appreciated that it was led by people who were from tech, who used to work at these companies, who used to invest in these companies. For some of these people, there are serious legal ramifications to speaking out about things that happened at companies like Google and Twitter and Facebook. And so I appreciate the fact that they're putting on some level themselves on the line in order to educate people on these topics. And on that note, I also really like that The Social Dilemma had more than just white men in tech in it. It also had doctors who specialized in addiction. It had tech ethics people. It had academic researchers who look into how social networks work. And I think that having the perspectives of all those different people was also really important to contextualize social media platforms in our larger society and the different ways that they affect us. And then lastly, in terms of format, I actually like the fact that it was a docudrama as opposed to your standard kind of boring documentary, because it seems to be engaging a lot more people, and in general it was just a much more interesting thing to watch than I think a lot of whistleblowing documentaries typically are. So those are the things that I thought that they did well, or that I appreciated about The Social Dilemma, and now let's get into the things that I think that they could have done better. First off, while I like the docudrama approach in theory, in practice I found that it over-exaggerated certain aspects of how social media platforms work or how people interact with them. For example, there's one scene where the fictional family is having dinner and the mother asks everyone to put their phones inside this time-locked safe, and the daughter, who had been on her phone earlier in the day, actually gets out a hammer and breaks the safe open in order to get her phone back 2 seconds after it goes in. Similarly, one of the central parts of the fictional family part of the documentary is the sociopathic AI figures who are controlling the notifications and recommendations that the son sees. And they do so by controlling this avatar in ways that seem both very intentional but also very human. And as we've discussed in other videos, algorithms aren't people. They don't think, they don't make decisions that way. And so I found that representation of AI to not be particularly accurate and to be potentially misleading to people in terms of how they think that social networks actually recommend content to us. In general, I found that it leaned into a lot of the dystopian technology stereotypes, some of which are based in reality and some of which aren't, and didn't focus as much on some of the broader issues that researchers have been studying and calling out for years. And while I appreciated the fact that they talked about mental health and political divides, they implied that the sole reason for increases in mental health crises and suicide attempts in teens and young adults was social media, which the research has shown is not actually true. It turns out to be a lot more nebulous than that. In contrast to over-exaggeration of certain issues, I also found that there were certain topics that were definitely oversimplified. In particular, there's often a comparison made in The Social Dilemma between different platforms, or referring to different platforms as kind of one entity. So email, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube are often compiled into big tech. And at the end of the day, the impacts and the ways that we use those platforms are all different, as are their incentive structures. For example, if we're framing social media platforms as an addiction, most of us can't quit our emails because we need to check them for work. More broadly, social media platforms and the tech industry at large are presented as this inhuman, unstoppable force that has the only goal of creating personalized recommendations that will increase advertising revenue, and that the only way that we can stop them is to outsmart the underlying algorithms. But these companies are made up of real people who have agency and who can choose to design and use these systems in a way that is better for society. They're also part of our larger society, so they can be regulated as we regulate everything else. Now, as I mentioned earlier, when it comes to oversimplification, this is an entry-level documentary. It's not meant for people who have been looking at these things for a while or who are familiar with them necessarily. And so I don't think it's a wholly bad thing, because I think that including all the information and all the broader impacts would probably be too much for the average person watching the video. Having said that, they rehash several points over and over again to the point where it becomes a bit redundant, and I think that they could have removed those redundancies and instead broadened the scope of the documentary instead. The third thing that they could have done better is address the fairly obvious diversity problem that The Social Dilemma has. I recall seeing one Black female researcher who appeared on screen for about 30 seconds, about an hour into the film, but aside from that, the experts are exclusively white and almost all male. And while racial and gender diversity are certainly important in these conversations, I actually think that the documentary loses something bigger by not having people like Ruha Benjamin or Sophia Noble or Meredith Broussard or Joy Buolamwini in here talking about how these systems have affected societies based on the research that they've been doing for several years. Specifically, while I think that it's important to hear from the people who work at these companies and who understand how these companies function and what their incentives are, I also think it's important to hear from people who are studying these companies from the outside and looking at the social ramifications of the platforms they develop. And while, as I mentioned, they do have perspectives from medical doctors, from tech ethicists, from social psychologists, most of the interviews are focused on the same 3 or 4 former tech investors or employees. And I think that in doing that, you bring a bit of a biased perspective to both the problem as well as the types of solutions that are recommended. And this brings me to my fourth and final thing that I think that The Social Dilemma could have done better, and is actually one of my bigger criticisms of it. And that's in how it gives recommendations on how we might solve the social dilemma. Specifically, the film itself is about 90 minutes long, and they spend the first 85 minutes talking about all the issues with social media platforms, and then the last 5 minutes or so, which includes the credits rolling at the same time, giving recommendations on how we might solve these problems. And in addition to the fact that putting the recommendations at the point in the film when everyone would turn it off because the credits have started doesn't seem like a great idea, a lot of the recommendations that they give are grounded in the same types of technology platforms that they've been saying are leading us to a dystopia. In particular, some of the recommendations include not clicking on videos that YouTube recommends for you, putting your phone outside of your bedroom before you go to bed, and using certain Google Chrome extensions. In fact, one of the few recommendations that I actually thought was useful was from Kathy O'Neill, who wrote Weapons of Math Destruction, and she mentioned a common recommendation that comes up a lot in these conversations, which is to diversify your information sources so that you can become better at critical thinking and better at identifying misinformation if you see it. Given that, I think that there are other things that they could have recommended to viewers, like furthering their education on this topic, learning more about how these systems work and those broader impacts that they don't talk about in The Social Dilemma, than focusing on beating the algorithms themselves, because why would you want to focus on beating the algorithms when you could just change the structures around them instead? So, having said all that, do I think you should watch The Social Dilemma? I would say yes. I think that most of the people who watch my channel probably won't learn anything new from it necessarily, but I do think that it's important to see how other people who have intersections with tech and algorithms and social media platforms are talking about these issues, what they see the major challenges to be, and how they're proposing to fix them. And like I said earlier, I do think it can be a good intro for people who aren't as familiar with the tech space, so recommending it to your parents and your grandparents might be a good idea, but I would follow it up with additional educational materials, maybe books or papers. I've included some in the description of this video that can help them learn more about how these platforms works and how these algorithms work, and put it in kind of the larger context of the interactions between algorithms and society and us as individuals. Now, I read a ton of interesting papers in order to make this video, enough to make a whole other video on the research itself, but videos like that don't tend to do that well on YouTube because they're fairly niche topics and a lot of the people who come across my channel wouldn't be interested. That's why me and my creator friends teamed up to build Nebula, a platform where you can watch my videos ad-free and we get to create an experiment with awesome content without having to worry about demonetization or paying tribute to the YouTube algorithm. We're thrilled to be partnering with CuriosityStream, a subscription streaming service with thousands of documentaries and nonfiction videos. Want to learn more about the history and limitations of electricity? Check out The Story of Electricity, about humanity's quest to master nature's most mysterious force. While CuriosityStream is all about big-budget nonfiction documentaries, we're building Nebula so that education-y creators have a place to try out new ideas that might not work well on YouTube. You'll find some of your favorite creators on Nebula, from Braincraft to Up and Atom to Midlife Crisis, as well as my monthly Nebula Journal Club, where I'll be doing some of those deeper dives into interesting papers related to one of the videos I do each month. In fact, the September Journal Club comes out today, September 28th, and we'll be diving into a paper on optical neural networks. CuriosityStream loves independent creators and wants to help us build our platform, so if you click on the link in the description or use my promo code Jordan, you can get access to CuriosityStream for 26% off their annual plans, with Nebula included for free as long as you are a CuriosityStream member. That's less than $15 a year. Clicking on that link really helps out my channel, so if you'd like to support me while getting to watch my videos ad-free, sign up for CuriosityStream and Nebula using the link in the description or using the promo code Jordan. Otherwise, if you like this video, you can let me know by smashing the like button and subscribing to my channel. You can also check out my video on Neuralink, which is a little bit more in this conversational style of video, providing commentary. So if this was something that you enjoyed, then that also might be a video that you enjoy. Otherwise, you can follow my PhD life on Twitter and Instagram, and I'll see y'all on Monday. Bye!